Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. Everybody has a bad game every now and then. Nobody can be perfect every single time they step on the field, and some players are going to have way better days than others. There are times where a defensive lineman that usually gets pressure gets stonewalled all day. There are times where a quarterback who is usually smart and accurate throws a bunch of picks. And there are times where a running back just isn't finding the holes he usually does. And the same thing applies to wide receivers. There are going to be some days where you just can't get anything going, whether it's because of great defense, great coverage, or just some surprisingly bad hands preventing you from catching anything thrown your way. But I guarantee you that it's tough to do a whole lot worse than this guy right here. This is Detroit Lions wide receiver Jeff Chadwick, and in 1989, he had a game that made him go from the starting receiver to cut in the span of 24 hours, because he found a way to drop an astonishingly high number of passes. I'm not talking about one or two passes. Oh no. I'm talking about a game so bad that you genuinely wondered if he soaked his gloves in butter before the game. And after one game, his long and somewhat illustrious career with the Lions came to a screeching halt and came to an abrupt end. This is the story behind the worst game by a wide receiver in the history of the Detroit Lions. Before I talk about the awful performance in question and what led to his departure from the Lions in the first place, we need some context to understand just who Jeff Chadwick is, and how he was doing heading into this game, as well as what his role was on the team. Chadwick joined the Lions as an undrafted free agent in 1983, and came out of Grand Valley State, where he caught 75 passes for 1,512 yards and 19 touchdowns. At the time, all of those numbers were career records for the school. However, because Grand Valley State doesn't exactly have name recognition, as only 2 players in school history had been drafted out of there by that point, if Chadwick wanted to make it into the NFL, he knew they would have to be as an undrafted free agent. He was going to have to prove himself. And sure enough, not only did Chadwick make it onto Detroit's roster during that 1983 season, but he became one of the best rookie receivers in football. The Lions made it to the postseason in 1983 for the second straight year, and for the first time in a non-strike shortened season since 1970. And a big reason why was because of Chadwick, who was second on the team with 617 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns, along with having 40 receptions. For some perspective on how good he was as a rookie, there were only 2 rookie receivers that season to have at least 40 receptions, 600 receiving yards, and 4 touchdowns. One of them was Willie Gault of the Chicago Bears, who was the first receiver taken off of the board when the Bears drafted him 18th overall in the first round. The other one was the undrafted rookie out of Grand Valley State named Jeff Chadwick. Chadwick made an immediate impact in Detroit and in the success of the team, and over his first 5 seasons, he might have been the most reliable receiver that the Lions had, as he was a real diamond in the rough. Through the first 5 seasons of his career from 1983 to 87, he had 185 receptions for 3,046 yards and 14 touchdowns. And in 1986, he averaged over 18.8 yards per catch, which ranked inside the top 10 of the entire NFL. He also had 995 yards that season, finishing just 5 yards shy of that coveted 1,000-yard season. And it wasn't like he was doing this with a great batch of quarterbacks. The majority of his touchdowns in that stretch came from Eric Hipple, who never had a season in his career where he threw more touchdowns than interceptions, and Joe Ferguson, who was a very solid quarterback in Buffalo, but by his mid-30s in Detroit, was a shell of his former self. In fact, by 1987, Chadwick was one of just 8 players in the history of the Lions, a team that had been around since 1930, to have at least 3,000 career receiving yards. Despite the poor play of Detroit during the mid-80s, things were looking pretty good for Chadwick. But by the end of the 1980s, it seemed as though everything was crashing down. The 1988 season didn't exactly get off to the greatest of starts for Chadwick, and I'm not even talking about it from the perspective that the Lions stunk, because they truly did. Turns out, the Lions were really bad in 1988, going 4-12 and replacing head coach Darryl Rogers after 11 games with Wayne Fontes. If you want to learn more about a really dumb decision they made during one of those 12 losses, where they ran one of the worst and stupidest fake punts you're ever going to see in your life, click the card in the upper right corner. But there were some bright spots that season. Mike Kofer made the Pro Bowl and had 12 sacks. Jim Arnold was a dominant punter who had a knack for flipping the field, being named a second-team All-Pro and a Pro Bowler. Keith Ferguson had 8.5 sacks, which was the second best total of his 8-year career. However, Jeff Chadwick was not one of these bright spots. He stunk. Because as it turns out, 1988 was the worst season of Chadwick's career. He missed the first 6 games of the season with an injured Achilles tendon, which also kept him out of most of training camp. Some reports say that it was strained, while others say that it was inflamed. Whatever the case, he was not good enough to play right away. And when he finally came back midway through the year, he was atrocious, as he now had a serious case of the dropsies. Chadwick was a pretty reliable receiver, but by 1988, he had Lions fans holding their breath any time the ball was thrown in his direction. In one game, a 23-20 loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he dropped a whopping 3 passes, with one of them being a potential touchdown. Chadwick was upset at himself about the awful game, saying, "I just feel bad about it. I let my teammates down, my coaches down, and myself down. I just have to try not to get too let down by this." And some of his teammates defended him after this game. Offensive tackle Harvey Salem said, "Jeff is very consistent and solid with his hands. It's just a bad game for Jeff and the team." And linebacker Dennis Gibson said, "You can never be critical of another player on your team." But not everyone was feeling the same way. Punter Jim Arnold, perhaps practicing his tight 5, said on Chadwick, "We call Jeff Chadwick the Roberto Duran of the NFL. Hands of stone. Get it? Get it? Stick to your day job." And head coach Darryl Rogers said on Chadwick's lackluster performance, "You all saw it. You don't need any comments from me." And it didn't get a whole lot better the rest of the way as 1988 progressed. By the time this disastrous season ended, he had just 20 receptions for 304 yards. It was a career low in receptions, being worse than the previous low of 25 during the 1985 season. It was a career low in receiving yards, being worse than the 416 he had during the 1987 season, although that low has an asterisk next to it due to the strike shortening the season. His 2 receptions per game average was a career low in receptions per game, being the previous low at 2.3 during the 1984 season. And his 30.4 receiving yards per game was a career low in that category, beating the previous low at 33.8 during the 1984 season. Nothing about this season went right for Chadwick. In just about every category, he had the worst numbers of his career. However, entering the 1989 season, on paper, he was going to be a starter. At least, he was going to be a starter for one game. Because that one game was so disastrous that it ended an incredibly successful career in Detroit overnight. September 10th, 1989. We're at the Pontiac Silverdome for this matchup between the Detroit Lions and the Phoenix Cardinals. Besides the fact that it's opening day of a brand new season, which is always exciting, there's a lot of storylines for the Lions here in this one. It's the first game where Wayne Fontes is the permanent head coach, as after coaching the final 5 games of 1988 on an interim basis, he was now the undisputed man in charge of the operation. He was responsible for righting the ship. It was the highly anticipated debut of Barry Sanders, one of the greatest college running backs of all time. You may have heard of him. And it was a big game for Jeff Chadwick, who was in the starting lineup after an incredibly lackluster 1988 season. And it didn't help that by this point in 1989, a lot of people were really starting to doubt Chadwick's abilities to play in the NFL. He did not have the best of training camps. He was put on the hot seat right away when, after the draft, Fontes made it a point of emphasis to see how a guy like John Ford, the team's second-round pick from West Virginia, compared to Chadwick. Right as it looked like he was starting to get things going, he suffered a shoulder injury during one of their preseason games against the Cleveland Browns, which kept him out for an extended period of time. And after coming back from that, he didn't really look the same. But now he was finally back and was hoping to prove himself. However, as you can probably guess by the title of this video, he did not do that. In fact, he did literally the exact opposite. On the first drive of the game, with the Lions in Phoenix territory and driving, looking to get some early points, quarterback Bob Gagliano fired a pass to Chadwick close to the sticks. The pass was dropped, and even though the Lions eventually got 3 points on the drive, the play stalled the momentum that Detroit was building. Tough catch, but one that a receiver at this level should be making, even if he does have to adjust his body a bit. That's one drop. And as you probably guessed, that would be far from his last drop. Let's jump ahead to the second quarter. With the Lions facing 2nd and 10, Gagliano fires a good throw down the sideline to Chadwick that should get the Lions into Phoenix territory. The key word here is should, because once again, Chadwick drops it. There are no excuses on that one. Yes, he had to go a bit lower than he probably would have liked, but he got 2 hands underneath it and it hit him right in the chest. Gotta be able to make that grab. Drop number 2. Then on 3rd down on that same drive, he drops this pass over the middle. Now I'm a bit iffy about this one because I'm not sure it's fair to necessarily chalk this one up as a drop. Plus, even if he caught it, he was not going to be anywhere close to the first down marker. Having said that, the official statistician from this game ruled it as a drop, so I've got to go off of that. At halftime, the Lions were trailing 6-3, and were unable to get anything going. While a lot of the blame went to head coach Wayne Fontes for inexplicably not playing Barry Sanders in the first half, which would look like an incredibly foolish decision once he inevitably came into the game in the second half and lit it up with 9 carries for 71 yards and a touchdown, Jeff Chadwick got a pretty substantial amount of the blame for his 3 drops as well. Especially after a preseason where one of the main concerns in Detroit was their lack of production at the wide receiver position, and especially after a poor 1988 season for Chadwick where he didn't do anything and performed well below his career standards and expectations, this game was not making matters any better. But don't worry, because it gets worse. Because in the third quarter, with the Lions pinned deep in their own territory, Chadwick had an opportunity to make an easy catch and give the team some breathing room. Sure enough, he drops it. I've got nothing for this one, but after this drop, Chadwick was yanked from the game and did not return the rest of the way. His final stat line from this abysmal display in the Silverdome, where he got booed heavily by the home fans, especially after that 4th drop, was 1 reception for 9 yards and 4 drops. The Lions lost the game 16-13, with Cardinals kicker Al Del Greco drilling the game-winning field goal with less than 20 seconds to go. And after the game, a ton of the talk was on the poor play of Chadwick and what his future in Detroit held. Turns out, there was no more future. Because despite being one of the greatest receivers in franchise history, and despite being a remarkable success story considering his path to even make it into the NFL in the first place, he was cut pretty much immediately after this performance, and never suited up in the Honolulu Blue ever again. After the loss, to say that head coach Wayne Fontes was fuming would be an understatement, especially since the team had no momentum following an 0-4 preseason and since they played sloppy football. He talked about the poor play of his receiving unit, saying, "We've had receivers drop balls for 3, 4, 5 games now. I will take a look at it hard." And on Jeff Chadwick, he singled him out in particular, admitting that Chadwick got benched and saying on his poor play, "I'm going to have to look at that personally." Once Fontes looked at it personally, he knew exactly what he had to do, because not even 24 hours after the game, he cut Jeff Chadwick. Now, Fontes said that this game had nothing whatsoever to do with his release, saying, "I would never cut a guy because he dropped 3 or 4 passes one time. It was a situation where he just couldn't get it going. We had to give him a change of scenery. I hope it works out well for him. I hope he doesn't come back to haunt us." However, are we really buying that? I mean, come on. You're cutting your starting receiver who was on the decline immediately after a game where he had 5 passes on target thrown his way, and he dropped 4 of them. The timing of it just doesn't make any sense if you're genuinely expecting people to believe that this game wasn't why he got cut. Especially when Chadwick himself said on his release, "I can't say I didn't see it coming." And to Chadwick's credit, he took the news incredibly well. He did not get into an altercation with his head coach, a la Derek Hatchett with Frank Kush, where the incident got so bad that Kush slapped Hatchett across the face. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. After thanking everyone and saying his goodbyes, Chadwick said on his release, "My family and everybody is here, but I don't think a change is all that bad. It would have been nice to finish out my career here, but how many players get to do that? If this is the worst thing that happens to me, I guess it won't be that bad." Once again, to Chadwick's credit, he was able to successfully bounce back from this, as he signed with the Seattle Seahawks later in the season, played there until 1991, and played in the NFL all the way until 1992, finishing his career as a member of the Los Angeles Rams. For an undrafted player to play 10 seasons in the league and record over 4,500 receiving yards, that is a heck of a career. And that's why it kind of stinks that for a lot of people and for longtime Lions fans, their lasting impression and lasting memory of Chadwick was this awful game against the Cardinals. It wasn't his rags to riches story. It wasn't the fact that he was incredibly reliable throughout the mid-80s. It wasn't his touchdown against the Kansas City Chiefs in 1988, which was the only touchdown of a 7-6 victory. Rather, people usually associate you with the last thing that you did. And in this case, the last thing that Chadwick did while sporting the Honolulu Blue was have a 4-drop performance and have what had to be the worst game by any receiver in the over 90-year history of the Lions franchise. Because after this awful game in the Motor City, when it came to his time in Detroit, his tank was officially running on empty. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to JaguarGator8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.